we come now this morning to the sixth story in this major closing chapter to the Old Testament. And this has to do with the story of Daniel in the context of Babylon. This part to the story right here. It's a 70-year period. Now again, just a few things by way of introduction. It was very, very significant what happened back here when Solomon in his later years did not steward kingdom in alignment with God's purpose. And so the kingdom was divided. And kingdom was entrusted to Jeroboam and to Rehoboam. Jeroboam took that entrustment and to establish or keep his kingdom, he created altars in Bethel and up in Dan in northern Israel and enticed all people in Israel to worship at those idols. It became a huge sin that affected all the northern tribes of Israel as well as even the southern tribes eventually. So all these kings walked in the way of Jeroboam. God raised up prophets to address that corruption of covenant and alignment with kingdom. And so you find prophets arising over and over again who steward the word of the Lord and seek to get those kings to turn from their evil ways back to the Lord. If they listen to the prophet, their kingship will remain. If they do not listen to the word, their kingship is removed. Their house is destroyed. And so you find all these kings, house destroyed, over and over again. You get down to the very end here, and here's the conclusion in 2 Kings chapter 17, that the text itself gives us as a summary of all of this. How would you like that in one paragraph? All of this story. Here it is. When he tore Israel away from the house of David, they made Jeroboam, son of Nebat, their king. Jeroboam enticed Israel away from following the Lord and caused them to commit a great sin. The Israelites persisted in all the sins of Jeroboam, did not turn away from them until the Lord removed them from his presence. Does that not produce fear in you? If God was to remove you from his presence, as he warned through all his servants, the prophets, so the people of Israel were taken away from their homeland into exile in Assyria. And now you get this whole story of Daniel that emerges. The tribes of Judah, there was a preservation of this promise given to David in 2 Samuel chapter 7, and it's referred to as the lamp of David, the lamp of David. Even though the tribes of Judah corrupted their ways, God said, I will never forget my promise to David. And so you find this getting down, and there's the last set of kings right here in the tribe of Judah, and particularly at the very center of these last remaining kings after Israel in the north is removed, these kings of Judah remain. And at the very center of this is a story of Josiah. And there was one final reformation and turning that took place. Here's a picture of that story real quick. Josiah, king, seeks to restore the house of God. This is hugely significant. Kingship on earth is to restore the house, the heavens and the earth. And the presence of God dwelling in a place symbolic of God's purpose in the heavens and the earth. When Josiah goes to seek to restore the house, they find the book in the house. The book had been forgotten. When when he reads the book, he tears his clothes, he recognizes covenant has been violated, and he goes to a prophetess. And the prophetess says, in light of breaking of this covenant, destruction is coming. So Josiah calls all the leaders. He reads the book to them. They begin to clean the house and renew covenant. Passover is celebrated once again. And then it says they start removing high places, and they start removing those altars that had corrupted the peoples in terms of their allegiance to God. And they come to the altar in Bethel, and the way to desecrate this altar is to dig up bones and put them on the altar. And amazingly, they go up and they dig up a grave. And that grave is the grave of that prophet who rebuked this altar. And now you've got a conclusion to the story. This and what happens during this time down here brings to conclusion again what had happened with Jeroboam and the prophecy against that altar. That is a huge picture of what's going to happen. Then you would think in the midst of all this renewal and what happens, God would restore, but all he says to Josiah is, Josiah, you will go to your grave and you won't see the disaster coming, but it's too late for restoration. So Judah is removed from the land. And this begins then the book of Daniel. We find during this final king here, Jehoiakim, that when he is taken off now into Babylon, we find the opening to the story of Daniel. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it, and brought people then into Babylon. Now, in this story, you have a great picture of what it can be like for God to take people who have a heart for him, like yeast, and put it in a loaf to leaven the whole loaf. To bring about a great missionary work in Babylon that will result in a proclamation of the king of Babylon to all the nations of the earth to worship this God of these guys. So there's all kinds of missionary lessons now in this. This is great cross-cultural work that begins now in the story of Daniel. So the first part to the book, and there's actually 2 parts to the book. You have the first 7 chapters were all written in Aramaic. Aramaic was the common language of the nation. And the message of this is for all the nations. And then from 8 to the end of the book, it's written in Hebrew, and the great focus of this is to the Jews. So this morning, we'll look at these first 7 chapters here. These first 7 chapters, there is an introduction, and then you've got these major parts, and they're not historically sequential. This is always a key. You will find that this final dream here and this vision here happens when the king in which this part to the story is talking about has already died. But it goes back and it picks up some account here. And this is kind of a clue that the author is not trying to put these stories historically, sequentially, time-wise. He's doing something else. Here's what I think he's doing. You find that the opening dream is exactly in parallel with the closing dream of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar dream, Daniel dream. Encased in these two dreams, there is a story about worship, and it has to do with idolatry and the consequence. You got dream of future destiny, and it encases then idolatrous worship. And then at the very center of the story, you have a thing about kingship in relationship to kingdom. And this has to do with future destiny. Just like the opening is about destiny, the conclusion is about destiny. This is that Hebrew parallelism, and I think it's the structure to these stories. And it helps draw us into the bigger story of what is being said here. Okay, so very quickly, we look at the introduction. The introduction has all kinds of clues as to what's going to come. It says that when Judah is brought into Nebuchadnezzar's hands, along with this, they took, it says, they carried off articles from the temple of God, and they put them in the temple of the gods in Babylon. Wonder, why in the world is this here? Well, it's going to come up in the center story here of what happens with those articles that are taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem to the temple of the gods. What happens with them? And then they bring in Nebuchadnezzar wants to bring into his presence some Israelites of royal descent. That's key. Royal has to do with kingdom, kingship. And so they're looking for some young people who have royalty behind them. Do you have royalty behind you? Ah, yes. And he was to put them in a training program for 3 years. Does that sound familiar? And he's going to teach them, they're going to teach them the language and literature of Babylon. They're going to learn language and culture. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. And they're to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Among these were some from Judah. Judah is the tribe that stewards what? Kingship. Some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. But the chief official gave them new names. Now it's very interesting what's happening now, because this is key. This is clue as to what's coming. He gave them new names. No, naming somebody is an act of what? Dominion. When he gives you a name, he's giving you a word of destiny, a word of dominion, because he owns you, and the one who owns you can determine your destiny. So, it's interesting, the names. Daniel, which in Hebrew means God is my judge, he gave them a new name, Belteshazzar. This is protector of the God, the king's God, the protector of the king, whose God is Bel. So here Daniel now is to be a protector of the king, stewarding idols. This violates the very nature of a prophet. 2 words. God's word. Kingdom. So it's an act of dominion to now try to ascribe on these young people a new name that will entice them and cause them to be in allegiance to the God of the king, protecting him. It's interesting. There's a great scholarly work that has been studied on this, and I tend to really believe it, that it was probably this little T-E-E in the middle of this name has the note of not protective. And the author makes a great case that when Daniel writes this, Daniel inserts the T-E in the middle of this name because this is not who he is. And the real name was Belshazzar. And you find in the middle of the thing, when the son of Nebuchadnezzar is named Belshazzar, it never refers to Daniel as Belshazzar. It goes back to the name Daniel. This is all clue, but that's just a little technicality. But it has to do with, there's a confrontation of kingdom in naming taking place. Hananiah has the name, the Lord is gracious. And they gave him the name Shadrach, one who has command of the moon god. Mishael, who is like God? Jehovah. And they gave him the name Meshach, who is like Aku, the moon god. Notice what's happening? Dominion. Allegiance to false gods that are taking place. Azariah, the Lord helps, gave him a new name, Abednego, which means servant of Nabal, the Babylonian god of wisdom. Babylonian god of wisdom. Now it says in the midst of this naming, as Nebuchadnezzar gave them new names, it says, Daniel, verse 8, resolved to not defile himself with the royal food and wine. Not to defile, resolved not to. Another way of describing this is he set his heart in opposition to that. Set his heart to stay aligned with his allegiance instead of being enticed to that other. And it was all expressed through food. But this is going to have a bigger implication in the whole confrontation that continues to arise in this story. Allegiance of heart in relationship to false gods. Okay? So, there's great lesson in all of this. Great missionary training. Teach them to learn language and culture. Here's a great one. You need to be deeply rooted in who you are and the name you carry, because you steward that name. That's at the heart of mission. The heart of mission. When Jesus was followed into the wilderness, it was a test in terms of how would he live out the name that he carried. Are you the Son of God? This is what I will do to live it out. Satan is seeking to tempt you away from that. And then all kinds of, I think, disciplines in which you learn to set your heart. And you practice it in relationship to food. You practice it in relationship to all kinds of things. It's setting your heart in alignment with kingdom such that you can stand amidst the kingdoms of this world and not be enticed. That is a discipline, just like exercise. Unless you exercise it, you're not strong to stand when the temptation comes. A lot to be said about all of that. It's internal provision that grows so that you can stand externally in the midst of it. And then you got to have respect for authority. And you can bring kingdom authority in the midst of darkness in a respectful way. Then, because it will be through love demonstrated on the cross, in the face of authority. So there's a great lesson in all this. Now, we begin to look at these, and I'd like to just go through each one of these stories briefly and draw you into the bigger story of what is being said here. There's a pattern in each story. The first one has to do with Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and it's all about the future destiny of kingdoms, and at the very end, a stone comes. And in the midst of this, there is a test that these three plus Daniel get drawn into. And their response, accompanied by sign, leads to a proclamation and an exaltation. And there's great lesson in the test, the response, the sign, the proclamation, and there's the result, the destiny, exaltation. You find the same thing in the next story. Test, response, sign, proclamation, exaltation. And then you got the center of the story here. And this is almost key to the whole thing right here. And then you got the next story that's in parallel with this one. Again, test, response, sign, proclamation, prosper. And at the very end, you've got this image that's in parallel with this image. Now let's look at the first one. Beginning in chapter 2, verse 1. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his mind was greatly troubled. He could not sleep. So as you know, he looks for interpretation of his dream. And he brings in all the wise men, all the magicians, all the sorcerers, all the astrologers, and he decides this: I want these guys to tell me my dream and then interpret it. Now, that is a huge thing. You know, it's one thing to interpret a dream that's told you. It's something else for you to tell me what my dream was. Then interpret it. Well, here's a corrupt kingship. The king answered, is firmly decided, if you don't tell me the dream, it's going to be death. Here comes the test. You don't tell me the dream, your destiny is death. Well, the people answered, there's no man on earth who can do what the king asks. You want to have that underlined in red. Yeah, there is no man on earth that can come up with this kind of thing. But there's a God in heaven who can reveal it. That's the key. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they don't dwell with men. That is very intriguing. These idolatrous gods are far removed. But here is the God we worship who dwells among us and who can reveal dreams. What does this tell you about God and our capacity in relationship to Him that other people do not have? It says that Daniel when he hears about this, he begins to respond. In chapter 2, verse 20, it said, 2 verse 14, it says that when he heard this, as the commander of Nebuchadnezzar was going to kill all the wise men because no one was coming forth to interpret or to tell him the dream, it says Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and with tact. I don't know what other translations might have. Discretion and discernment. Now there you're beginning to see the character quality of Daniel in the midst of test. And he very respectfully responds to the commander who's coming to kill him. And he asked the king's officer, why does the king issue such a harsh decree? And then it says, Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel, and at this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. What does that tell you about Daniel? He has got the kind of faith that believes that God can reveal in the midst of this. He's putting his life on the line. Maybe it's already on the line. It is on the line. But then Daniel has the kind of faith that says, God could reveal this to me. Significant. So it says Daniel then returned to his house, and he explained the matter to his 3 friends, and he urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this matter. And so during the night then, as they prayed, God revealed. And Daniel breaks out into, the sign is, no man on earth could ever come up with this dream, nor its interpretation. But here God breaks in and reveals and gives interpretation to Daniel in the night as he prays. Interesting that God would even be speaking to a Gentile king like this. This tells you something. God is often going way before us. He's working in people in these lands and these kingdoms before we ever get there. And when we get there, we got to be the kind of people that can address what God is doing in them. We don't come with our strategies. We come looking for what God is doing and participate with Him in it. But we got to have the kind of character to be able to do that. So, Daniel breaks out into praise. Listen to his praise. Praise be the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are His. He is the one who's wise. He's the one who's powerful. He changes times and seasons. He sets up kings and He brings them down. He's sovereign. He gives wisdom to the wise, knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with Him, and light can penetrate the darkness. I thank and praise You, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and power. You've made known to me what the king asked of You. You have made known to us the dream of the king. And then he goes in and explains the dream to Nebuchadnezzar. And the dream is this picture of a huge statue. Here's what he sees. The head is of gold. The chest is of silver. The thighs are of bronze, and the feet and legs are iron and clay. And then it says, and this is the focus. The focus of the dream after he sees this is this. And it says, this dream, O king, is revealing to you kingdoms to come. What's going to happen in the future? It's future destiny that is ahead. God sees it. It's amazing. He's looking ahead hundreds of years. And God is disclosing to Nebuchadnezzar what's going to take place. You looked, O king, and there before you stood this large statue, enormous, dazzling, awesome in appearance. But then, after he describes these things, it says that while you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands, and the rock struck the feet of the statue, and the silver and gold were broken to pieces at the same time and became like chaff on the threshing floor as in summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain, and it filled the whole earth. A rock grew, and it filled the whole earth. Became a mountain, filled the whole earth. Now, the emphasis in the whole thing is this that is coming. A rock that's coming. It's going to become a mountain, and it's going to fill the whole earth. Who is that? This was the dream. Imagine someone telling you a dream that you've never told them. It says then the interpretation comes. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven is going to set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. That rock is going to become a kingdom that will never be destroyed. Nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it itself will endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock, cut out of a human mountain, not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and the interpretation is trustworthy. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, and out comes the proclamation. Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you are able to reveal this mystery. Then the king placed Daniel in a high position, exalted him, made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon, placed him in charge of all its wise men. Amazing, isn't it? There's a great missionary work pictured for us that resulted in, imagine, the king of Babylon proclaiming that the God of these men is the God of all gods. How about that for results? Amazing. Okay, we come now to here's the picture now. In the midst of Babylon, he's picturing what's going to happen in the future, and it has to do with the gold, the silver, and that's going to become this kingdom, then the bronze, this kingdom, and then comes Rome, and in the midst of the Rome, the stone comes. There's the picture of what's coming. Okay, the second one now. Now, beginning in chapter 3, verse 1, King Nebuchadnezzar made, and it's interesting, after he's received this dream and its interpretation and all the significance of a kingdom that's coming that he believes is associated with the God of these people, he goes and he makes an idol, and he makes it of pure gold from head to foot. There it is. Imagine. This is Nebuchadnezzar's response He's not converted in heart, apparently. It's interesting. Well, here's a Babylonian document that has been discovered during the days of Nebuchadnezzar. Here's what it says on it. It warns not to harm the statue that has been set up. Besides my statue as king, I wrote an inscription mentioning my name, erected for posterity. May future kings respect the monument, remember the praise of the gods. He who respects my royal name, who does not abrogate my statutes and not change my decrees, his throne shall be secure, his life will last long, his dynasty shall continue. Is that not deception at its core? This is what idolatry and how it corrupts kingship. An expression of corrupt kingship seeks to establish kingdom by their own name, their own expression of house and temple and God. It's all corruption. It's similar, but it's all false. Now, it says, when he erected this great idol, then it was proclaimed throughout the kingdom, this is what you are to do, O peoples, nations, men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, and so forth, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Imagine making a decree for everybody in all the nations to bow down to this idol that Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. So here comes the test. You do not bow down and worship, you'll be thrown into a blazing furnace. So it says that they discover these Jewish boys not bowing down to the idol. There's some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you set up. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summons them, says to them, one final chance, bow down or you're going to be thrown into the furnace. Now comes the response, verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. Listen to those words. We do not need to defend ourselves before your threat. They're secure in what? Themselves and where their hearts have been set. And they do not need to defend. All they need to do is trust. And in the midst of trust, who will be their defender? God will defend them. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us. There's their trust, their faith. He's able to save us. He will rescue us from your hand. And then even this, even if he doesn't, we will not bow down and worship this idol. Oh, wow. So Nebuchadnezzar became furious. So he ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times more. And then he went and he got the strongest commanders in his army to go and tie up these guys. And then they went and threw them into the furnace. And the first thing that happened is the commanders that threw them into the furnace were burnt. Amazing. And then all of a sudden, as Nebuchadnezzar is sitting there watching this, all of a sudden the sign emerges. It says, he said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound, unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. That's an interesting phrase. He's got the idea of someone who's like his God, a son of the gods, who's in their midst. Wow, Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace, and he shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. And they walk out, and then it says, they saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was the hair of their heads singed, their robes were not scorched, and they didn't smell at all like fire. You can even get near, like in my backyard, we have a fire pit, and we sit around that fire pit, and I go back into my house after that, and I smell like what? Smoke. These guys had no smoke on them. Their clothes were not singed, nor was their hair. That is a sign. That is a sign. There is something miraculous behind these guys. Beyond that they didn't burn up in the furnace. But it's emphasizing the miraculous, the sign that accompanies this. And then it says, Nebuchadnezzar broke out in a proclamation. Begins verse 20. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, Praise be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel, rescued his servants. They trusted in him, defied the king's command. There's that same word. They did not defile themselves with the food. They didn't defile themselves with the king's command. Okay? And were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save like this one. And then it says the 3 guys are exalted. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. There it is again. Test. What can you learn from standing in this kind of test? What kind of faith did these guys have? Their response in that faith in the midst of this test. Here's God's work, and it leads to this. Imagine proclamation to the nations once again about the God of these 3 guys. Do we carry that aroma among the nations? Oh, I put a few pictures of India in here. The acts of dominion that you find all over the land of India or anywhere. We've got our own idols right in this country. Here's the god Shiva. Imagine you walk up to this idol and all the symbols of power and so this is the god of the Ganges. And he rules in this place. Hardware. This means the city of God. Go a little bit more east, you come to Kali, Calcutta. Here's the goddess Kali ruling over Shiva. Look at all the symbols of power and authority in the hands and the heads, the dominion, the blood. She's a blood-sucking god. You must appease her with blood. Or Shiva again. All the symbolism in this. The Ganges flows from the hair Shiva. Oh, there's just all kinds of symbolism. We don't have time. It rules all over North India. Or you get down to Middle India. Here's a Muslim community, and here's a little idol, a Hindu idol. Oh, there was great commotion that ruled out of this, because these guys the Hindu people started to make this little idol a little bit bigger, or the place where the idol was, and it encroached upon the dominion of the Muslims in this monument. And here it is, and a great clash, and it spread throughout the whole city. Amazing story about that. And then there's a Muslim fort right there, and it's interesting, when you go up the steps to this fort, notice the acts of dominion by the Hindus. They put their marks on every step on the way up to this Hindu fort. Acts of dominion. You get to the very top, and here's a Hindu temple on the top of a Muslim fort. It's amazing all the symbolism associated with this. There's our symbol. This kingdom dominion. So unlike the others. I was on the top of this hill at the foot of this cross, seeing the impact of this cross upon 60 prisoners that walked up to it. Powerful day I've ever had. Now we get to the center of the story. It says Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. He has a dream. He has a dream about a tree. As I was lying in my bed, the images and visions that passed through my mind terrified me. So I commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be brought before me to interpret the dream for me. When the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners came, I told them the dream, but they could not interpret it. So then, it says, he brings in Daniel. And Daniel says, no mystery is too difficult for my God. And he interprets this dream. And the dream is a picture of a tree, a great tree. The tree grew large and strong, and its top touched the sky. It was visible to the ends of the earth. Now, sometimes, I think Jesus made up his parables based on some of these stories. And I think about the story about the parable of the mustard seed becoming like a very large tree, which the birds nest in it. It has all the same symbolism as this tree. But it's the kingdom of God versus this one is representative of Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. In the visions, while I was lying in my bed, I looked, and there before me, it was visible to the ends of the earth. The leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant. On it was food for all. Under it, the beasts of the field found shelter, and the birds of the air lived in its branches. From every creature under it was fed. Then, in the visions I saw, while lying in my bed, I looked, and there before me was a messenger, a holy one, coming down from heaven. And it said, cut down the tree, cut off its branches, strip off its leaves, scatter its fruit, cut down, trim off, strip, scatter its fruit. But let the stump and its roots remain. Let him, and all of a sudden it starts referring, the tree is associated with a person. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven. Let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed. So this one is going to live among the animals, and his mind is going to change to that of an animal until 7 times pass. Wow. His decision is announced by this messenger, so that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men and gives them to anyone he wishes and sets over them the lowliest of men. This is the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. And then Daniel comes to interpret it. And the heart of the interpretation is, Daniel, this is going to happen until you recognize that the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind and bestows on it whomever he wishes. You're going to be driven away. You're going to become like an animal, dwelling with animals. Your very image and likeness that is distinct from all things in creation is going to be taken from you, and you're going to become like an animal with an animal mind. Interesting, idols in India are often a mixture of human and animal quality. Wonder, is that distinction lost? Your kingdom will be assured to you only after you recognize that it is heaven that rules. Amazing. Amazing. But it says that Daniel, 12 months later, after he has this dream and it's interpreted to him, 12 months later he's walking on his roof. I think I'm going to have to come to an end. Okay. He's walking on his roof, and 12 months later, imagine a whole year after this, it still hasn't happened. And he's walking on his roof, and it says these words were on his lips. Is not this the great Babylon that I have built as the royal residence, by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? He's glorying in his own glory. And it says the words are still on his lips when a voice comes from heaven. This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. Driven. And this dream then becomes fulfilled. Then after 7 times, it says, and it's just one little verse, he raises his eyes towards heaven. And when he raises his eyes towards heaven, his kingdom is restored. And it's even greater than what it was before. There's a key to the whole. Well, boy, I've run out of time. And I wouldn't do justice if I just kept going. So I think I'm going to have to stop it, and we'll pick up the rest later, huh?